Okay, this is just a little bit of background with regard to markets. So we're going to look at supply and demand and explain what is supply and what is demand. Then we're going to look at the factors that affect demand and then the factors that affect supply and how you can graphically display supply and the relationship between price and quantity supplied, and graphically display the relationship between price and quantity demanded. So if you look back at chapter 1 or lesson 1, we looked at the characteristics of health and health as an economic good. These characteristics, so the characteristics of health, have implications on how that good is traded on the private market. As you know, and as we've covered already in lesson 1, health is derived from economic goods, and many of these goods are traded on the market. So, when you go into your pharmacy and you buy any kind of health good or product, that should have implications on your own health. Consumers decide on how much to purchase, and demand predicts how firms and consumers behave. So we're going to look, as I said to you, at economic models that basically try to graphically display this relationship, where we're going to look at demand and the relationship between price and quantity demanded, and supply and the relationship between price and quantity supplied. So when we examine a market, we have to look at the role of demand and we have to look at the role of supply and see what implications they have. Just to define what we mean by supply, supply is defined as the quantity supplied at a set price. So as a supplier, you're very conscious of how much to supply, as well as the price on the market. With regard to demand, demand is defined as the quantity demanded by consumers who are willing to pay at a set price. The choice of the consumer basically underpins the demand curve, and the demand curve is constrained by a budget, in other words, your income, for example. Where demand meets supply, at that point, that's where the market actually exists. So we're now going to look at the factors that affect demand and supply. Just one other point with regard to the healthcare. Healthcare, as you know, and as we go through the lessons, you'll see this, but it's funded and organised in different ways. And the one thing I suppose I want you to be conscious of with regard to healthcare is that healthcare systems have both a public and a private mix. And in any healthcare system, having some understanding of demand and trying to forecast even that level of demand is particularly useful and important, particularly, as you can imagine, in a private market where a lot of the times you're dealing with a lot of competition. And this has knock-on effects on price, which can result in profits or losses. Now, as I said to you, we have a mix of public and private. So in the public system, predicting a change in demand and being able to forecast that change in demand is useful. But it's difficult to do because you have always got this element of uncertainty. And that's one of the characteristics that has been highlighted in health. But it is useful to try and determine the use of healthcare resources. And if you go back again to lesson 1, this is something that's important when we're trying to allocate resources both efficiently and equitably. So again, this is just to try to change demand, and I suppose the big thing to try and meet targets in health policies. One thing to note with regard to suppliers of healthcare also need to be aware of how demand changes, as that will affect the price of their good and therefore the supply of the good. Suppliers also need to be aware of the type of good they are supplying. Like, is it a normal good? Is it an inferior good? Is it a luxury good? So what kind of good or product are you supplying? Because that has implications on how responsive your product or your good is to changes in price. A lot of the time, with regard to health, these are goods that are needed. So again, I suppose you have to be conscious as a supplier as to how responsive changes are, and also be conscious of the different policy implications that can guide you on price. Demand tells us the quantity of a good or service that buyers wish to buy at each conceivable price. The quantity demanded of a good is inversely related to price. With supply, supply is the quantity of a good or service that sellers wish to sell, and then the quantity supplied is positively related to price. So again, as price goes up in relation to demand, as price goes up, quantity demanded can come down depending on the type of good that you're offering on the market. The same way with supplier, if you just took supply and looked at the supply's conduct, again, if price goes up, you're going to supply more of the goods. Therefore, there's a positive relationship between the two. Just in relation to demand and what can change demand, the factors that can affect demand are obviously things like taste. So consumers' taste can change demand. The number and the price of substitute goods that are on the market. So, if there are goods that are similar or the same on the market, that can have implications on the demand for your product. The same way with complementary goods, goods that complement each other. Again, that can have implications on the demand for your good. Another, I suppose, and normally that can act as a constraint, but income can have an effect on the demand for the good, as well as how income is distributed in society. The last one then is individuals' expectations, and again that can affect a person's demand. There are other factors as well that can affect it. Things like durable goods. So if a good is durable, obviously they last for a long period of time. The demand for these goods can be quite volatile because, as I said, a lot of time they can be stored for long periods of time. With the exchange rate, again, depending on the exchange rate, but foreign exports, if you are exporting internationally, again, fluctuations in the exchange rate can affect your demand. And the last one then is derived demand, and a lot of the time, and this is particularly important in the area of health because, as you know, that's again one of the characteristics that we've highlighted in lesson 1. But this is demand dependent on the demand of another good, so health insurance, for example, and the demand for health services. So I said we graphically display a supply curve. So before we do that, I just wanted to look at the factors that affect supply. So we have different factors that can affect supply, such as the cost of production, so how much it costs to actually produce the good, the profitability of alternative products, so again, are there substitutes in supply already, the profitability of goods in joint supply, again that's coming back to the idea of complementary goods. Nature and random shocks can affect the supply of a product, and then of course the aims of producers and the expectations of producers can affect the supply of the product. So just to graphically illustrate the demand curve, this is just a very brief outline of what a demand curve could look like. So what you have is price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis, and then you have a downward sloping demand curve. So as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. So you can see here quantity demanded shifts back from 2.8 to 1.8 as price goes up from €25 to €35. Okay, and that's just basically a better graphical representation of what I've been trying to show you there. Again, with the supply curve, we have price on the vertical axis, quantity supplied on the horizontal axis. Now it's the opposite in a sense that it's upward sloping from left to right, and as you can see, as price goes up, quantity supplied can go up, and this is just a better graphical representation of that. So where the two intersect, so where demand and supply intersect at this point here, that's where the market is. Thank you for your time.